The prophet Isaiah, in chapter 44 of his prophecy, chides the cults of his day, the idol worshippers. He says that they take a block of wood and cut it in half, and they use one part to build a fire and warm themselves. With the other half, they build a god and bow down and worship it. Isaiah makes clear that this is the stupidest thing in the world. What could be more foolish? Well, today, we give ancient idolaters a lot of competition. The transgender cult is a recent example. We now say we believe little girls can become little boys simply by believing it so. A nominee for the United States Supreme Court could not define what a woman was. You can now be fired from certain jobs for using the wrong pronoun. We have drag queens reading stories to little children in public libraries. Most Americans think this is nuts, and in time God will bring down his wrath and judgment on such a foolish rejection of his truth, his obvious truth. God created gender, and he only created two. This fact is abundantly clear in Genesis, where we see that God created male and female, and he did not create gender fluidity. It was only 10 years ago that nobody on earth made an issue of this. But now it is front burner stuff in media, government, and academia. Just a quick refresher, why has the left gone crazy about this? The most important religious belief of the progressive left comes straight from Karl Marx. All of life is a battle between the oppressed and their oppressors. Life is given religious meaning when you fight the oppressor. But you have to decide who the oppressed are. The left sort of picks and chooses who the victims are, and a decade ago, they decided it was gender dysphoria. This was not on the left's radar until about 2013. But all of a sudden, drag queens and their ilk became the group the left had decided to protect. And now we have the insanity of the transgender movement. I do not deny that it is still with us. Easter Sunday fell on March 31st this year. It is the most sacred day for the largest religion on earth and the largest in Western culture. So what did the President of the United States do? He declared it Transgender Day of Visibility. He declared, "You are America, and my entire administration and I have your back." Shane and Jennifer DeGrosse live in Washington State. By all accounts, they are excellent foster parents, but the state suspended their foster license because, as Christians, they did not support the gay and transgender agenda. So rather than allow this fine couple to raise needy children, the state decided to enforce their ideology. Andrea Chu wrote a cover essay for New York Magazine. In it, he makes the argument that the freedom to change one's body is a basic human right. Children are humans, so they should have the right to change their bodies. Children's rights? As Lionel Shriver observes in The Spectator, quote, "Progressives never seem indignant over the gross unfairness that children can't buy alcohol, purchase cigarettes, join the army, get a tattoo, work in factories, marry or consent to sex with an adult. But according to the American left, 12-year-olds are mature enough to decide to halt the progress of puberty, potentially imperiling their brain and skeletal development, commit to a costly pharmaceutical regimen replete with irksome side effects for the rest of their lives, have healthy body parts hacked off, accept a future of sexual dysfunction, and forego parenthood altogether." End quote. Matt Taibbi is a man of the left, but even he saw the craziness of this. Taibbi said Chu is trying to legalize pedophilia. He goes on to say, quote, "As anyone who's raised children knows, leaving kids to the hazards of their own free will is a completely unworkable concept apart from its outrageousness and moral insanity." The New York essay perfectly captures the lunatic nihilism American academics have fanned into a mass movement by granting the most idiotic forms of teenage self-absorption the status of wisdom and insight. End quote. So yes, the trans movement is insane, but in government and media, there is still strong support for its agenda. But there are signs the tide is beginning to turn. The biggest blast of the warning trumpet came recently in England. Dr. Hilary Cass of that country's National Health Service came out with an independent review of the treatment of gender dysphoria in hospitals. She called it blatant quackery. The main problem, she said, is the lack of evidence for such interventions. It hasn't been studied, much less proven, and as a result, England has stopped such interventions. Many secular writers are beginning to define the transgender craze the way I have been defining the left for years, as a religious cult. Here's a quote from a secular writer, Kathleen Stock. At long last, the spectacular slow-motion implosion of trans ideology is underway. It's only a matter of time, though it may be a while yet, before it goes the way of all those other cults. Nearly every indicator of cult membership is present among so-called affirmative clinicians and their hapless patients. Cults are not unusual. As human phenomena go, the unusual point is that one came to control parts of the National Health Service in England. End quote. One researcher noted there is a great irony in the fact that the modern process of stamping out religion produces countless caricatures of it. 24 states have passed laws outlawing the sterilization and mutilation of children. Many more are likely to do so. No less a leftist voice than the New York Times followed up Dr. Cass's report with an article offering reservations about such invasive surgeries on the bodies of children. One of their columnists, David Brooks, called Dr. Cass, quote, the kind of hero the world needs today, end quote. According to Brooks, Dr. Cass has questioned puberty blockers and hormone therapies, to say nothing of surgeries. The New York Times is important not for its news value, which is not to be trusted, but for its signaling to its progressive readers. It has given them permission to question the gender transmission movement. If you've lost the New York Times, you are on the verge of losing your progressive audience. Carol Markowitz in the New York Post has reported on a Dutch study that shows gender dysphoria is more a fad than an actual medical condition. The researchers concluded gender non-contentedness, while being relatively common during early adolescence, in general decreases with age and appears to be associated with a poorer self-concept and mental health throughout development. If this is indeed the case, it is insane to perform radical bodily altering surgeries on teenagers. A lot more people are beginning to realize this. Other researchers have found that the desire to identify as trans is akin to eating disorders. Entire groups of teenage girls suddenly start identifying as boys or as non-binary, just as girls often emulate each other through starving and purging in their quest for competitive thinness. In other words, gender dysphoria is a psychological, not a medical condition. There is no scientific definition of gender dysphoria. Its diagnosis is based completely on the subjective feelings of the individual. The only way we know a 13-year-old girl is suffering from it is if she says she is. But there is another reason to predict the downward trend of the transgender craze: litigation. As the Roman Catholic Church becomes more outspoken against the surgical removal and refashioning of healthy breasts and genitals to treat gender dysphoria, the Oregon affiliate of a Catholic hospital network faces litigation for performing gender-affirming surgery on a woman who regretted it. People who underwent radical sex-altering surgery in recent years are now suing because they regret their decision and feel they were improperly advised, if they were advised at all. I predict we will see an outbreak of these kinds of suits in the future. One of the largest hospitals in Missouri recently ended transgender surgeries for the simple reason they could not afford the financial jeopardy it places them in. We are now seeing sports organizations forbidding biological men from participating in women's athletics. The National Association of Intercollegiate Athletics, representing 241 schools, recently announced that only athletes whose biological sex assigned at birth is female will be allowed to participate in women's sports. A number of international track and swimming organizations have also placed bans on biological males participating in women's sports. All of us have seen pictures of giant men standing on the podium with much smaller women to receive their medals. Parents are going to war with school districts, demanding that the schools alert them if their children are desiring to change genders. Then there is the catastrophic market failures of Bud Light and Target, who embrace the most demented aspects of trans ideology. And finally, the world's top chess federation has sparked a furious sexism row after banning trans women from competing in all-female contests while it decides whether they have an unfair advantage. Apparently, men are much better than women in chess, so biological males have been prevented from participating in women's tournaments. When you've lost chess, you've probably lost the whole game. Our God is the God of all creation, and his will reigns supreme. He will expose idolaters for what they are. Apparently, he is doing that with the trans movement. May we reach out and offer his grace to everyone as he brings judgment and righteousness to the earth.